The pen was already in my hand, the ink already touching the paper, when my sister-in-law walked into the lawyer's office and said the words that shattered my entire world. "Margaret, honey, why are you signing anything for Nathaniel? He's not even your husband anymore." For a moment I thought I had misheard her, that the air conditioning humming overhead had scrambled her sentence into something cruel and impossible. But she was not smiling, and her hands were trembling around a manila folder she clutched to her chest like armor, and in that single breath, everything I believed about my marriage, my husband, and the life we had built together came crashing down around me in the quiet, sunlit conference room of a law office in downtown Charleston. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to pause for a moment, because stories like this one are hard to hold alone, and I don't think we're meant to. If you believe in kindness, in forgiveness, in second chances, and in the quiet, stubborn hope that things can still turn out right even after betrayal, I'd love for you to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to our channel. We tell these stories because so many of us have lived through some version of them, and there is real comfort in knowing we're not walking through it alone. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, to a woman named Margaret Ashworth, a father's dying wish, and a marriage that looked perfect from the outside but was hiding something no one could have imagined. My name is Margaret Ashworth, though for 11 years I went by Margaret Colston, and if you had asked me on a Tuesday morning in early spring whether my marriage was happy, I would have told you yes without hesitation. I would have told you that Nathaniel Colston was the kind of husband women dream about, steady, charming, endlessly patient, the sort of man who remembered the names of your coworkers and brought you coffee exactly the way you liked it, 2 sugars, a splash of cream, never more. I would have told you that after 11 years together, we had built something solid, something that could weather any storm. I did not know, standing in my father's grand but quiet house on the outskirts of Charleston 2 months after his funeral, that the storm had already come and gone, and that I was the only one who hadn't noticed the wreckage. My father, Walter Ashworth, had built his fortune the hard way, starting with a single hardware store in a small South Carolina town and turning it, over 4 decades, into a regional chain of home improvement centers that eventually caught the attention of a national retailer willing to pay an extraordinary sum to absorb it. He was not a flashy man. He wore the same brown leather boots until they fell apart, drove a truck older than some of his employees, and never once, in all my 36 years, made me feel like the daughter of a wealthy man. He made me feel like the daughter of a man who worked hard, loved fiercely, and expected the same from the people around him. When he died of a sudden heart attack on a cold February morning, the $25 million he left behind felt less like a fortune and more like a weight, a responsibility I hadn't asked for and wasn't sure I knew how to carry. Nathaniel had been wonderful in the weeks after the funeral. He handled the caterers, fielded calls from distant relatives who suddenly remembered they were family, and sat beside me every night while I cried into pillows that still smelled faintly of my father's cologne. He held my hand at the reading of the will, squeezed it gently when the lawyer, a soft-spoken woman named Corinne Pruitt, explained that the entire estate, all $25 million of it, had been left to me and me alone, with a single handwritten note attached that read, "For my Maggie, so she never has to depend on anyone who doesn't deserve her." At the time, I thought it was simply my father's old-fashioned way of making sure his daughter was provided for. I did not understand, not for months, that it was also a warning. In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel and I began talking about what to do with the inheritance. He suggested, gently and reasonably, that as husband and wife, everything should be shared equally, that it made sense to add his name to the accounts, to restructure the trust so that we were true partners in this new chapter. I remember sitting across from him at our kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the window over the sink, watching him sketch out a simple plan on a legal pad, half to me, half to him, a joint foundation for charitable giving, a shared future built on my father's legacy. It sounded beautiful. It sounded like partnership. I told him I needed a little time, not because I doubted him, but because grief made every decision feel enormous, and he had nodded and kissed my forehead and told me to take all the time I needed. What I did not know was that 3 weeks before that conversation at the kitchen table, Nathaniel Colston had walked into the Charleston County Courthouse and filed for an uncontested divorce, using an old power of attorney document I had signed years earlier during a business trip when I couldn't be present to handle some routine paperwork for our rental property. I did not know that he had forged my signature on the divorce petition, claimed irreconcilable differences, and quietly finalized the dissolution of our marriage in a proceeding that took less than 15 minutes and that I never once knew was happening. I did not know that legally, by the time he sat across from me sketching out plans to share my inheritance, he was no longer my husband at all. He was simply a man who understood that South Carolina law made it far more complicated for an ex-husband to make claims on an inheritance left solely to his former wife, unless that former wife voluntarily signed her wealth over to him first, believing him still to be her husband, believing the two of them still to be partners bound by love and law alike. I want to tell you that I noticed something was wrong before Bridget walked into that office, but the truth is, I didn't. Grief has a way of narrowing your vision, of making you grateful for anyone who stays close, anyone who holds your hand through the worst nights of your life. Nathaniel stayed close. He held my hand. He told me he loved me, and I believed him, because why wouldn't I? We had been together since I was 25 years old, since before my father's business had ever grown into something worth this much money, since back when Nathaniel was a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm and I was a schoolteacher who loved him for his terrible jokes and his habit of leaving little notes in my lunch bag. I had no reason to believe that the man who once wrote, "You make ordinary days feel extraordinary," on a napkin and tucked it into my sandwich had become someone capable of forging my name on legal documents to strip away my marriage without my knowledge. Bridget Colston, Nathaniel's younger sister, had never been particularly close to me, not out of unkindness, but simply because our lives moved in different circles. She was a paralegal who worked long hours at a firm 2 towns over, fiercely independent, sharp-tongued in a way that used to intimidate me at family dinners. But Bridget had always loved her brother with the kind of loyalty that made her protective of him even when he didn't deserve it, and it was that same loyalty, twisted and complicated, that brought her into Corinne Pruitt's office that morning, manila folder in hand, her face pale beneath her freckles, her voice shaking as she said the sentence that would change everything. "Margaret, honey, why are you signing anything for Nathaniel? He's not even your husband anymore." I remember setting the pen down slowly, as if it had suddenly grown too heavy to hold, and looking up at her with what must have been a completely blank expression, because my mind simply refused to process what she'd said. Corinne Pruitt, seated across the table with her reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair, went very still, the kind of stillness that told me she, too, sensed that something enormous and terrible was unfolding in her quiet office with its tasteful watercolor paintings and its bowl of butterscotch candies on the side table. "What are you talking about, Bridget?" I asked, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and far away, like it belonged to someone else. Bridget's hands were shaking as she opened the folder and slid a single document across the polished conference table. It was a certified copy of a divorce decree, dated 4 months earlier, bearing my name, Nathaniel's name, and a signature at the bottom that was supposed to be mine but that I had never written. "I found it in his desk 2 days ago," she said, her voice cracking. "I was looking for a document he asked me to print for the accountant, and I found this instead. Margaret, I didn't know what to do. I've been sick about it for 2 days. I almost didn't come, because he's my brother, and God help me, I love him, but I couldn't let you sign your entire inheritance over to a man who isn't even your husband anymore, especially not when I think that's exactly why he did this in the first place." I picked up the document with hands that no longer felt like my own and read it 3 times, 4 times, my eyes tracing over the words, irreconcilable differences, and uncontested, and finalized, as though repetition might somehow change their meaning. The signature at the bottom, the one meant to be mine, was close, unnervingly close, but I knew immediately it wasn't my handwriting. The loop of the M was wrong, too tight, too controlled, nothing like the loose, hurried scrawl I'd been signing my name with since childhood. Corinne leaned over to examine it, her expression hardening into something I hadn't seen from her before, a kind of quiet, professional fury. "Margaret," she said carefully, "I need you to tell me honestly, did you know anything about this divorce filing?" "No," I whispered, and the word came out broken, splitting apart in my mouth like something fragile. No, I didn't know. I didn't know anything. The room seemed to tilt around me. I thought of every moment over the past 4 months, Nathaniel bringing me tea in the mornings, Nathaniel sitting beside me at the funeral holding my hand so tightly it left marks on my fingers, Nathaniel whispering, "We're going to be okay, Maggie, I promise," into my hair the night my father died, and I understood, all at once, that every single one of those moments had happened after he had already legally ended our marriage without telling me. He had held my hand at my father's funeral as my husband in every way except the one that mattered most, the one written into public record at the county courthouse, and he had done it, I understood with a sickening clarity, because it protected him. If I signed over half of my inheritance to him while believing he was still my husband, and later discovered the divorce had already been finalized, there would be little I could do. I would have voluntarily gifted a fortune to a man with whom I had no remaining legal or marital claim, a transaction that would be nearly impossible to reverse. It was not carelessness. It was not an oversight buried in old paperwork. It was, as horrifying as it was to accept, a calculated plan. I did not cry in that office, though I think Bridget expected me to, and I think even I expected to. Instead, I felt something colder settle into my chest, something that steadied my hands even as my heart cracked wide open. "I need to see everything," I said to Corinne, my voice quiet but no longer trembling. "Every document, every filing, everything he's done in the last 6 months. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with." Corinne nodded slowly, already reaching for her phone to call in her paralegal, and Bridget, still standing at the edge of the table like she wasn't sure she was welcome, said softly, "I'm so sorry, Margaret. I should have told you the moment I found it. I was scared, and I know that's not a good enough reason, but I am so sorry." I looked at her, this woman who had never been particularly warm to me over the years, who had chosen, in the hardest moment of her life, to protect a stranger's daughter over her own brother, and I felt something unexpected move through the wreckage of that morning, gratitude, sharp and unfamiliar, cutting through the grief. "You did the right thing," I told her, and I meant it, though the words felt strange coming out of a mouth still numb with shock. "You did the hardest right thing a person can do." The days that followed unfolded like a slow-motion collapse of everything I thought I understood about my life. Curran's office pulled the full court record and discovered that Nathaniel had used the old power of attorney document, one I had signed nearly 6 years earlier for an unrelated real estate closing and had completely forgotten still existed, to file paperwork on my behalf without my knowledge, forging the required additional signature where the power of attorney didn't extend. It was, Corinne explained gently but firmly, sitting across from me in a bright conference room with the midday sun streaming through tall windows, almost certainly a criminal act, forgery and fraud, potentially felony charges depending on how the district attorney's office chose to pursue it. "You have options, Margaret," she said. "This is going to feel overwhelming, but I want you to understand that you have real, solid legal options here." I drove home that afternoon, not to the house Nathaniel and I shared, but to my father's house, the sprawling but unpretentious property on the edge of town where I'd grown up, where I still kept a room exactly as it had been when I was 17 years old. I sat on the porch swing my father had built with his own hands the summer I turned 10, and I watched the light shift through the old oak trees in the yard, and I let myself finally feel the full weight of what had happened. Not just the fraud, not just the forged signature, but the deeper wound beneath it, that the man I had loved for 11 years, the man who had held me while I cried myself to sleep after my father's death, had been quietly, methodically planning to take everything from me the entire time. I thought about the night my father died, about Nathaniel's arms around me in the hospital waiting room, and I wondered, with a nausea that rose in my throat, whether even that had been genuine or whether he had simply been calculating how much time he had left before I signed the estate paperwork, before the window for his plan began to close. I did not call Nathaniel that day, though he texted 3 times asking where I was, whether everything was all right, whether I wanted him to bring dinner over. I stared at his messages, this man who had woken up that morning already knowing our marriage was over, already knowing he had built an elaborate lie to protect a scheme, and I felt a strange, quiet clarity settle over me. I would not confront him in anger, not yet. I would not give him the chance to talk his way around the truth, to spin some story about protecting our finances or planning a surprise or any of the smooth explanations I could already imagine him constructing. I would wait until I understood the full shape of what he had done, and then I would decide, with clear eyes and steady hands, exactly how I wanted to respond. Over the following 2 weeks, Curran's team uncovered more than I could have imagined. Nathaniel had, 6 months before my father's death, taken out a significant business loan under our joint name, a loan I had never been told about, used to fund a failing investment in a friend's restaurant venture that had since collapsed, leaving nearly $400,000 in debt. He had been quietly drowning financially for over a year, hiding it from me with the same careful precision he'd used to hide the divorce, and when my father passed away and left me an inheritance vast enough to erase his debts many times over, he had seen not a tragedy to grieve alongside me, but an opportunity to solve his problems permanently, cleanly, in a way that would leave him legally untethered from any responsibility for the marriage he was simultaneously ending. It was, Corinne said one afternoon, one of the most calculated cases of financial deception she had encountered in over 20 years of practicing family law, and she said it with a kind of weary sadness in her voice that told me she had seen this story before, in different forms, with different names. I want to pause here and tell you something that surprised me, something I didn't expect to feel amid all that anger and grief. I did not hate Nathaniel, not entirely, not in the way I thought I would. I felt a deep, aching sorrow for the 11 years I had given to a marriage that had apparently been, at least toward the end, built on a foundation I couldn't see. I felt fury at the deception, at the forged signature, at the casual cruelty of a man who could hold my hand at my father's funeral while already planning to strip away everything my father had left me. But underneath all of it, there was something quieter, something that felt almost like grief for the version of Nathaniel I had loved, the young accountant who wrote silly notes on napkins, who I genuinely believed had loved me once, before something in him had bent and broken under the weight of debt and shame and desperation. I did not excuse what he had done. But I found, to my own surprise, that I did not want to become a person consumed by hatred, even toward a man who had betrayed me so completely. The confrontation, when it finally came, happened on a bright Saturday morning in the garden behind the house Nathaniel and I had shared, a house that, I now understood, I had every legal right to reclaim entirely for myself, since our marriage had already been dissolved and the home had been purchased years earlier with funds from my father's early business success. I asked him to meet me there, told him I wanted to talk about the inheritance, and I watched him arrive with the easy, confident smile of a man who believed his plan was still working, who had no idea that Bridget's conscience had unraveled everything 3 weeks earlier. He sat across from me at the little iron table where we used to eat breakfast together, and I watched him reach for my hand the way he always did, and I let him take it for just a moment before I set the certified divorce decree on the table between us. I watched the color drain from his face in real time, watched the practiced smile falter and collapse, watched 11 years of careful charm crumble into something raw and frightened. "Maggie, I can explain," he started, and I held up my hand, not in anger, but in a kind of exhausted calm that surprised even me. "I don't want an explanation built on more lies, Nathaniel," I said. "I want the truth, all of it, right now, or I want you to leave this property before I call the police." And to his credit, or perhaps simply because he understood there was nowhere left to hide, he told me the truth, or at least the truth as he understood it, the restaurant investment that had failed, the debt he'd been too ashamed to admit to me, the mounting pressure from creditors, and finally, in a moment that I believe was the only fully honest thing he said that entire morning, he admitted that when my father died and left me the inheritance, he had seen, for the first time in over a year, a way out of the hole he'd dug for himself, and he had chosen, in his panic and his shame, to take it in the most dishonest way possible rather than simply telling me the truth and trusting that I would help him, as I always had before. "Would you have?" he asked me quietly, and there was something almost pleading in his voice, something that, despite everything, still ached with the residue of 11 years together. "If I had just told you the truth about the debt, would you have helped me?" I thought about that question for a long moment, watching the wind move through the hydrangeas my father had helped me plant along the garden fence years earlier. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe. Probably, actually, because that's who I was before all of this, someone who believed that love meant showing up for the people you loved even when things got hard. But you didn't give me the chance to be that person, Nathaniel. You decided, all on your own, that I wasn't someone you could trust with the truth, and instead you chose to forge my signature and steal my marriage out from under me without a single word. That's not a mistake born of panic. That's a decision, made over and over again, every single day you sat across from me and pretended to be my husband while you were already legally free of me. He didn't argue with that. I think, in the end, some small part of him understood there was nothing left to argue. I told him that I would not be pursuing criminal charges for the forgery, not out of forgiveness exactly, but because I did not want to spend the next several years of my life tangled in a courtroom, reliving this betrayal over and over in front of a judge, when what I truly wanted was to close this chapter and walk forward into something new. Corinne had advised me that this was entirely my choice to make, that the district attorney's office would likely pursue charges only if I formally pressed the matter, and after much thought, sitting alone on my father's porch swing for long hours over several days, I decided that my peace mattered more to me than his punishment. I did, however, insist through Corinne's office that he sign a full release relinquishing any claim, past, present, or future, to my father's estate, and that he take full responsibility for the business debt he had incurred without my knowledge, removing my name from any joint liability. He signed everything without protest, his hands shaking, his eyes red, and when it was finished, he asked if there was any chance, someday, that I might forgive him. I think I already am forgiving you, I told him, and I meant it, though the words surprised me even as I said them. Not because what you did was okay, because it wasn't, and I don't think I'll ever fully understand how you could do it. But holding on to this anger forever isn't a punishment for you, Nathaniel. It's a prison for me. I don't want to spend the rest of my life carrying the weight of what you did. I want to set it down and walk away lighter, even if that means you never fully understand how much you hurt me. He nodded, tears finally falling, and I felt no satisfaction in his tears, only a tired, hollow sadness for the marriage we had once had and the man I had once believed him to be. In the months that followed, I threw myself into a project that had been quietly forming in the back of my mind since the day Corinne first read my father's will aloud in that sunlit conference room. My father's note, so she never has to depend on anyone who doesn't deserve her, had haunted me in the weeks after discovering Nathaniel's betrayal, but slowly, it began to transform into something else, something closer to a calling than a warning. I decided to use a substantial portion of the inheritance to establish the Walter Ashworth Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping women rebuild their financial independence after divorce, betrayal, or sudden loss, offering free legal consultations, financial literacy courses, and emergency housing assistance for women who found themselves, as I had, suddenly and unexpectedly alone. I reached out to Corinne first, who agreed enthusiastically to serve on the Foundation's advisory board, bringing with her a network of family law attorneys willing to donate hours of free consultation to women who couldn't otherwise afford legal help. I reached out to Bridget next, and in one of the more unexpected turns of that entire strange year, she became not just a supporter of the Foundation but a close friend, someone I called on hard days, someone who understood better than almost anyone the complicated grief of loving a family member who had also caused deep harm. "I lost my brother the day he did that to you," Bridget told me once, sitting across from me at a small cafe downtown, sunlight pooling on the table between our coffee cups. "Not because you took anything from him, but because I realized I never really knew who he'd become. I think finding a way to help you rebuild is the only way I know how to make peace with that." I also found, in the process of building the foundation, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years, Rosalind Fenwick, a woman I'd gone to college with who had built a successful career in financial planning after surviving her own difficult divorce a decade earlier. I ran into her, of all places, at a farmer's market on a bright Saturday morning, both of us reaching for the same basket of heirloom tomatoes, and within 20 minutes of catching up over paper cups of coffee, she had agreed to help me design the financial literacy curriculum for the foundation, drawing on her own painful experience of learning, in her 30s, how to manage money for the first time after her ex-husband had controlled every dollar of their household finances for the entirety of their marriage. It's strange, Rosalind told me that morning, watching the market bustle around us, how the worst thing that ever happens to you can become the exact thing that lets you help someone else survive the same storm. I thought about that conversation often in the months that followed, as the foundation grew from an idea sketched on legal pads into a real, functioning organization with a small office downtown and its first cohort of 12 women completing our pilot financial literacy program. I watched women who had arrived in our office shattered, uncertain, ashamed of situations that were never their fault, slowly begin to stand a little straighter, speak a little louder, ask questions about budgets and credit scores and legal rights with a confidence that hadn't been there when they first walked through our door. I thought about my father, about the note he'd left me, and I understood, finally, that he hadn't simply been protecting me from Nathaniel specifically. He had been hoping, in whatever way a father hopes for a daughter he won't live to see grow older, that I would learn to build a life that didn't depend on anyone else's permission to be whole. There is a particular afternoon I return to often when I think about how far I traveled that year, a Tuesday in late autumn, nearly 8 months after that terrible morning in Curran's office. I was standing in the small courtyard behind the foundation's building, helping set up chairs for a graduation ceremony for our second cohort of women, when I noticed a woman standing alone near the entrance, hesitating, clearly uncertain whether she belonged there. Her name, I would learn, was Delphine Marchetti, a woman in her 50s who had spent 30 years as a homemaker before her husband left her for a colleague, taking with him nearly all of their joint savings through accounts she hadn't known existed. I walked over to her, introduced myself, and watched her face when I told her my own story, watched the recognition and relief pass over her features, the particular comfort of realizing you are not the only person this has happened to, that the shame you've been carrying alone was never yours to carry in the first place. How did you find the strength to start over? Delphine asked me that afternoon, and I thought about the question for a long moment before answering, because I wanted to give her something true, not something that simply sounded inspiring. I don't think I found strength all at once, I told her. I think I found it in pieces, on ordinary days, doing ordinary things. Signing a document. Making a phone call. Getting out of bed on a morning when I didn't want to. Forgiving someone, even a little, even when I didn't think I could. It wasn't one big moment of becoming strong. It was 1,000 small moments of choosing not to give up, even when giving up would have been so much easier. She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes, and I squeezed her hand the way Bridget had once squeezed mine in Curran's office, the way one woman passes strength to another simply by refusing to let go. I never remarried, though it isn't for lack of opportunity or a hardened heart against love. I dated occasionally in the years that followed, met kind men who treated me with respect and honesty, but I found that I was, for the first time in my adult life, genuinely content on my own, building a life defined not by partnership but by purpose. I kept my father's house, filled it slowly with new memories layered over old ones, planted a second row of hydrangeas along the fence in the spring after everything settled, and often sat on that same porch swing in the evenings, watching the light change through the oak trees, feeling something I can only describe as peace, hard-won and deeply earned. As for Nathaniel, I heard through mutual acquaintances, and later through Bridget, that he spent several difficult years working to pay off the debt he had accumulated, that he eventually found steady work again, rebuilt something quieter and more modest than the life he had once imagined for himself. I did not seek him out, and he did not attempt to contact me beyond a single letter he sent nearly 2 years after our confrontation in the garden, an unexpected letter that I almost didn't open, sitting on my kitchen table for 3 full days before I finally sat down with a cup of tea and read it. In it, he wrote that he understood he had no right to ask for anything more from me, that he simply wanted me to know he thought of what he'd done every single day, that the shame of it had, in strange ways, become the thing that finally forced him to grow into someone more honest, someone he hoped, eventually, might deserve a second chance with someone else, though never again with me. I did not respond to the letter, not out of lingering bitterness, but because I understood, reading it, that I had already said everything I needed to say to him in that garden, and that my life had moved so far beyond the boundaries of our old marriage that there was simply nothing left to add. If there is a lesson I carry from that year, and I believe there is, it is this: betrayal has a way of revealing not just the character of the person who wounds you, but the character of everyone standing around you in that moment, the ones who choose truth even when it costs them, like Bridget, and the ones who choose to help you rebuild rather than simply pity your loss, like Corinne and Rosalind, and every woman who has walked through the doors of the foundation my father's legacy made possible. I learned that inheritance is not only about money, though the money mattered, and I will not pretend it didn't change the shape of what I was able to build. But the deeper inheritance my father left me was a kind of quiet, stubborn belief that I was worthy of a life I did not have to beg anyone to share honestly with me, a belief I did not fully understand until the worst thing I could imagine happened, and I discovered, slowly and painfully and then with growing certainty, that I was capable of surviving it and building something meaningful from the wreckage. Before I close this story, I want to ask you something, because I think the best stories aren't the ones we simply watch, but the ones we carry forward into our own lives. If you have ever had to rebuild trust in yourself after someone you loved broke it, or if you have ever been the person who told a hard truth to protect someone else even when it cost you something, I would love for you to share that in the comments below. Tell us about a moment when honesty, even painful honesty, ended up being the kindest thing anyone ever gave you. Our community is built on stories like these, and I believe, truly, that reading each other's experiences of survival and forgiveness makes all of us a little braver, a little less alone in our own hardest seasons. Margaret Ashworth did not simply survive the collapse of her marriage, she transformed the wreckage of it into a foundation, literal and figurative, sturdy enough to hold up not just herself but hundreds of women who came after her, women who walked into a small office downtown carrying shame that was never theirs to carry and walked out, months later, standing taller, speaking louder, believing, perhaps for the first time, that they were capable of building a life on their own terms. Her father's $25 million became more than an inheritance passed from father to daughter, it became a bridge, connecting the pain of one betrayal to the healing of countless others, proof that even the deepest wounds can, with time and courage and the right people standing beside you, become the very soil from which something beautiful grows. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Stories like Margaret's remind us that even when the people closest to us fail us in ways we never saw coming, we are never truly out of chances to rebuild, to forgive, to become someone stronger and wiser and, in the end, more truly ourselves than we ever were before. Thank you for spending this time with us, for letting these stories into your heart, and for being part of a community that still believes, against every hard lesson life offers, in kindness, in hope, and in the quiet, powerful grace of second chances.